Thank you, Captain Grubbs. It's very nice to see a pragmatic approach among professionals being able to pull together and create something that actually works and makes money. Right, I'd like to introduce Commander Jason Tama from the U.S. Coast Guard Sector San Francisco to talk to us about San Francisco Bay e-navigation prototypes. I know that there's some really cutting-edge thinking in San Francisco on all sorts of levels, and I've been told that San Francisco Bay can be a microcosm for so many places in the world. So if we have a prototype that works in San Francisco, I think it's well worth paying attention to.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tama. I'm the Chief of Prevention at Coast Guard Sector San Francisco. I'm actually going to be co-presenting with Lieutenant Commander Amy Wirtz, who's here as well. She's our Chief of Waterways Management and has been a leader on this front in San Francisco. Thanks to CMA for hosting the conference, and thanks to all those that put it together. It's a really fantastic venue. I know we're in the highly coveted after lunch spot here. So we'll try to keep it interesting. We're going to tell you a couple stories. I think you heard from Mike Solosi this morning on Coast Guard high-level vision and perspective is on e-navigation. We're going to show you some field application and what we're doing now that we're very proud of here in San Francisco, what we've implemented here over the last several months to prototype some of this new technology. Place to do it than the San Francisco Bay Area, which is just a hotbed of innovation. And you can call yourself an innovator in the federal government, and that's a whole different meaning than innovator in the private sector. But we value any feedback and questions you may have for us. And I guarantee you we're going to show you some cool pictures that you've never seen before, which isn't that hard, but you know. Anyway, topic of discussion, we're going to talk about some AIS ATON applications and how we've used AIS as a waterways management tool, how we're leveraging AIS to share some data, specifically meteorological and hydrographic data, and share with you what we think are some lessons learned that may be applicable in your own countries and ports. So here we are in San Francisco. Of course, we don't have the level of traffic that we have in the New Orleans, Baton Rouge area, but we like to say we have a lot of everything in San Francisco. We've got 30,000 vessel transits per year. We have one of the largest fishing fleets on the West Coast, one of the top container terminals. We have 5 oil refineries. We have one of the nation's largest largest ferry systems. We have an offshore environment that traverses multiple national marine sanctuaries. We have a very busy central bay with a lot of traffic in a small area. And we have an river system which starts right out here, right where the Golden Bear is moored as we head up to our San Joaquin rivers. So it's a great place to apply and test. And we also have a tremendous amount of fog. We have hundreds of days of fog per year somewhere here in the bay and a number of very interesting microclimates. So where does this story start? Did anybody watch America's Cup this year or last year? Yeah, I mean, that was awesome, right? If anybody's a New Zealand fan, I'm sorry. But rest assured, I think there was only one American on the Team Oracle yacht that won. So we can take comfort in that for those of you that were New Zealand fans. Great event. The America's Cup is known for a number of things, one of which, of course, lawsuits. But I want to talk about, I got one left, thank you. I want to talk about the technology piece. America's Cup has always been known as a place to innovate and use new technology, particularly in the vessel design side. And we talk for hours about these yachts that were 72 feet long, went upwards of 50 knots with these winged sailcraft here on San Francisco Bay. And for the first time in the 162-year history of the Cup, it was hosted inside San Francisco Bay. So how did we do that? Well, it's a very busy bay, as we talked about. We have deep draft ships in and outbound. We have an Alcatraz ferry service. We have excursion vessels. We have multiple ferries operating on the bay. And we wanted to put the race, America's Cup wanted to put the race right along the city front where everybody could see. That's a whole nother conversation And Amy will talk a little bit about some of those decisions. But this started actually in 2012. There was a World Series event, which was to promote the main event using these smaller 45-footers and a smaller box on San Francisco Bay. This is what it looked like. You had a cruise ship coming in. You had a number of America's Cup race official yachts and spectator vessels. For the actual event last year when things were much busier, but we had a box on San Francisco Bay. Well, where's the box? You can't really see it. How would we tell ships where the vessels were going to race? Well, the old way of doing that was the VTS would point by point, latitude and longitude over the VHF radio. And those of you that are mariners, how many of you have heard a broadcast like that? How many of you wrote down intently exactly where those positions were and then plotted it on your chart? I know nobody did. Maybe a few of you did. And we had some folks from the America's Cup approach us, a gentleman named Stan Honey, who was role here. He won that for his role as navigator on a round-the-world sailing race. He also, for those of you American football fans, he also is the guy that invented the yellow first down marker. Anybody seen that? Or the blue dot that follows the hockey puck in NHL. And if anybody watched the America's Cup on TV, all of the telemetry that you see on television actually won an Emmy Award for that. So he said, hey, how come we can't transmit some AIS markers to show everyone where the box is? And he approached the Coast Guard. We approached our partners at the district. Yes, we'll give you authorization to prototype this. And Stan and his team were the first ever entity to receive MMSI numbers from the Coast Guard to transmit their own AIS data, and he used his own Vesper system and broadcast these points, and it marked what the box looked like. And we got a lot of really positive feedback from the pilots. So we said, what can we do further on this? And we now have 25 different AIS ATON deployed. The America's Cup was a cause for action for us. We have an offshore application, an approach application, and an inshore application. I'll talk about those briefly. You saw some of these from Mike Solosi this morning. We're now broadcasting 17 virtual AIS in the offshore environment, marking our reporting points in the VTS. These reporting points have always been there. Now you can see them on electronic chart or an AIS integrated radar. It's actually reduced VHF radio traffic and helped us on that front with reducing frequency saturation. We have an approach application. This aid here to the south is called Mile Rock. It's on a very dramatic looking structure that's falling apart that we can no longer afford to maintain. And this is an opportunity to put an AIS ATON to possibly replace an aid that we can no longer maintain. The aid on the northern side there is marking shoal on a turn point in our Deepwater Channel. The pilots asked for this location because of the large concentration of recreational vessels during the summertime, and this would be an opportunity to help them see where this aid is relative to some of that recreational traffic. And we also have an inshore application on the San Francisco Bay Bridge. Anybody go across the Bay Bridge yet since you've been here? Okay, well there's the Bay Bridge, and I'll tell you a story. There's 4 main spans for navigation. You can see the 5 towers there, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo. You see the width of those spans. And we have an unfortunate history of large ships running into the bridge relatively recently. On our left is the Costco Busan, which was a container ship which hit the bridge in 2007, spilling 58,000 gallons of oil. They hit the Delta Tower. Then the second photo on the bottom there is the tanker Overseas Raymar, which hit the bridge last January 2013. Tower. They were both northbound in heavy, heavy fog. I'm certainly not going to stand here and tell you that aids to navigation or e-navigation was, or lack thereof, was the sole cause. There were a number of other factors. We heard bridge resource management mentioned by Lee, a number of other factors, but both of these cases we had bridge strikes. In the case of the Overseas Raymar, it was a northbound tank ship. Fog was less than a half mile. It got much, much lower as it approached the bridge. They had a following current. They were navigating with paper charts. They were originally targeting the chart and instead had to go for the Delta, or chose to go to a different span when they realized that the Raycon at the Charlie Delta span was out that morning. So you can see the track line in purple there. I know it's a little bit hard to make out. Actually, excuse me, it's green. They were originally lined up for one of the center spans of the bridge and altered course for Delta Echo, turned late, and alighted with the Echo Tower on their starboard quarter. There's the actual radar picture from the bridge of the ship. You can see that there's no Raycon at the center of the Delta span. You can see the Raycon on the Delta Echo span. And you can also see that it's kind of hard to see where the bridge towers are. As the ship gets closer and you get tremendous amount of radar return off of the steel on the bridge, it's difficult to see. And that was one of the things that came out of the investigation. Now, again, many, many other factors here that were part of this case, but one of the applications that we looked at was let's prototype marking the bridge towers with AIS ATON. And you can see them, they're marked with a star because the blue diamonds are somewhat difficult. But there they are, and as of just this past month, we have 5 AIS ATON out there, and they're marking the bridge. You saw this slide earlier from Mike Solosi's presentation. This is AIS integrated radar coming through the bridge and seeing these tower markings. Is it a panacea? Certainly not. Is it a useful tool, perhaps, for navigating low vis? Perhaps. We need feedback from the maritime community on this test application. Right now, if you talk to the pilots, they'll tell you about 20% of our ships, on average, give or take, not a scientific study, have AIS integrated radar. Those that do not cannot see this technology. Okay, AIS is a waterways management tool. I'm going to cover this very quickly, and I'll turn it over to Amy. We talked about waterways management. Captain Cullen spoke about it at lunch. This is an extremely powerful tool for waterways management that we're only beginning to discover. Here in California, there's an air emissions requirement that's been in effect since 2009. It requires the use of low sulfur fuel, 0.1% distillate fuel only. That's been in effect since July 1, 2009. That's enforced 24 nautical miles offshore. You can see that 24 nautical mile line. It has caused a dramatic change in how ships route themselves along the coast of California. Now, up until a few years ago, everybody just spoke about it in anecdotal terms, but we now have the data and capability to actually look at this and see what's changed. And I would argue that a similar change is probably happening even further offshore because of the 200-mile ecozone. I won't get into great detail on the California piece, but here's how that routing has changed. You can see we have 3 lanes, blue, green, and red. The western lane is the green lane, and that green is just to illustrate the different lanes. That, of course, doesn't look like that. These are actually outbound transits in the graph that you see. And effective July 1, 2009, where that orange line is, you can see a dramatic shift in where vessels go. That western lane is now increased by about 40% relative to the past because ships really want to get out of California quickly. I know none of you want to get out of California quickly because the weather might be better than where you are, but the fuel is expensive, and ships are doing everything they can to minimize their time in that zone unless they absolutely have to from a schedule perspective. Some ships, the container lines between LA and California, they're on a very tight schedule. They'll run in that southern lane, but most of our traffic now is in that western lane. Visually, you can see the difference. The slide, the picture on the left is April 2009 compared to April 2010. April 2009 being before implementation of that regulation. And look at April 2010 after implementation of that regulation. You see a much higher density of traffic going through that western lane where there's a thicker, deeper red, where we're seeing much more traffic there. You have to employ systems thinking when you make these changes as a planner, and even if you're doing something like air emissions, you have to think about the impacts to the system. And we now have the tools where we can look at those impacts and evaluate them, and we now have the tools where we can use it as a forecast tool to see what these changes might be, which was not done in this case. Okay, I'll turn it over to Amy to talk about America's Cup and a couple other things.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Commander said, my name is Lieutenant Commander Amy Wirtz, and I'm the Chief of Waterways Management at Sector San Francisco. So Commander just talked about a few of the things we're doing with the buoys, and then about an application of using AIS data sort of after the fact to look and see what the overall waterways routing implications were of the CARB rules after they went into effect. I'm going to talk about 2 instances of using AIS data for proactive managing, and then a little bit more about what we're trying to do to push information out to the mariners using this technology. So this is the America's Cup regulated area for the 2013 races. We went through a really long process to build this box over multi-year planning. The key point here is that we worked with the Harbor Safety Committee, with the pilots, with all of our partners in San Francisco to build a regulated area to accommodate racing of boats that weren't built yet. No one knew exactly how fast the sailboats were going to be. No one knew exactly how they were going to behave. So we didn't really know when we carved out this big piece of water exactly if it was going to be the right thing. So we had this in place, everything looked good. We have that nice transit route there for the ferries to get in and out, a little bit of access across the waterfront for excursion folks. And we were lined up after the 2012 races with the smaller box, thought we were looking good. And then in October of 2012, during a practice run, the first boat that was actually done being built was one of Oracle's, and they had an accident. And they capsized in the bay, and as a result of that capsize, ended up getting swept out the gate by the ebb current. Their boat was pretty much smashed up, and they had to start over from scratch. So we learned a little bit from that, but there were some factors in that didn't really create too much of a safety case at that point for changing anything about our regulated area. Then a very unfortunate accident in April of 2013 during another practice run inside the bay. The Artemis craft had another capsize, and there was a death associated. Andrew Bart Simpson with the team was killed in this, and sort of sent a shockwave through whether or not we were going to be able to continue, and whether America's Cup was going to be able to be held in the bay. So as a result of these 2 incidents, when America's Cup Race Management did their safety stand down and looked at all of the causative factors, they came back to us and said, we want to change the box. And this was a regulated area box that we had been socializing for well over a year, and there's a lot of implications of the traffic management and how we were going to be routing ships around it. And so the blue up there is what the regulated area was going to look like, and the red was the new proposal. It doesn't look like very much, just extending the box a little bit to the east up there in the northeast corner and cutting. We liked the cutting off the piece down there in the south. But we were concerned because that area right between where the box is and Treasure Island over there to the east is Anchorage 7. There's not a lot of good water there, and we were always concerned about that as a pinch point for vessels coming out of the deepwater traffic lane, making the turn into the Delta Echo span to have a safe transit down to Anchorage 9 and into Oakland. So we didn't really have data at first. We just had a feeling, an unease about adding that area to the box and creating an even deeper pinch point there. So we were able to go and pull NAIS data and pull the tracks for vessel transits. And this is an example of one of the plots that we created and that we used to look at to see if we do, that you can see the small corner that's added, the triangle on the eastern edge there would be the extension. How much would we be impacting the deep draft traffic? How close are we cutting it if we extend the box over there all the way to the east, where they're asking us for the safety of the competitors and, quite honestly, for the safety of spectators and the vessels coming through, because there was still an unknown factor of whether the sailboats might go out of control when they're making that turn there at the leeward mark. So we used this data and other days' worth. This is one example of a day's worth of data, or a composite week worth of data, this one is, to look at this and to decide whether or not we could make this adjustment by balancing the competing uses of the waterway. And what we came up with in the end was that we were able to do that by, we cut that in about 2/3. The extension to the east was not quite as big as what they had asked for initially. And we made that a no entry zone, and then we made the entire Anchorage 7 and a little bit extended beyond that a no loitering or anchoring zone. Anchorage 7 was already closed in our special local regulation, but we just took it this step further to make sure that our deep draft vessels coming through would have a clear path. And things turned out fairly well. Here's an example of a day. This picture is taken right from the corner, the northeast corner at the top of that transit zone that was there for the ferries. The Coast Guard cutter Aspen was sitting there. You might have seen them on TV out there holding that line. And you can see the fleet of some spectator boats that was still hard to control, but we were able to mostly keep clear and allow to have all of our traffic come in. And the result of all the work that we did, both on the front end and those analyses that we did of the AIS data to do that proactive managing of the competing uses of the waterway, was that in the 65 days of racing between 2012 and 2013, not a single vessel transit was delayed due to the America's Cup box being put in place. So we were really proud of that. And that was certainly not just the Coast Guard. That was a very collaborative effort with everyone of our port partners. So moving on, another way that it has been used proactively as a waterways management tool is looking at some TSS modifications. In 2009, the Coast Guard undertook a PARS, a Port Access Routing Study, off of the coast of California. This was, the goal of the routing study was to increase predictability, to decrease the likelihood of casualties and collisions offshore, and just generally increase navigation safety. There had been a fairly high-profile collision between a deep draft vessel and a fishing vessel off the coast of Point Reyes, just to the north. And so the way that AIS was used here was to look and see, it may seem obvious, but that pretty much vessels follow the TSS when there's a TSS there, and that once the TSS terminates, they disperse in all different directions. So that as soon as that prescribed lane is gone, the vessels no longer are going in that straight line. So we use that AIS data, and then to look at we're able to bring in some biological data from NOAA. Not exactly e-navigation data, but sort of used collaboratively with the AIS data, and look at these areas of special biological significance, which also happen to correspond with fertile fishing grounds. There's a number of different electronic plots like this from AIS data and from fishing vessel monitoring data that gave us the information about where the highest concentrations of fishing vessels are when. The salmon picture looks similar to this, the crab picture looks similar to this. This one happens to be for rock fishing. And you could see that it's that area around, particularly around the northern TSS, where there is a high concentration of fishing vessels, and right at that point where we now know from looking at the AIS data that the deep draft traffic disperses out in all directions. So in the shaded different colors there is what the proposed traffic separation scheme was, to extend the northern TSS to the north and create that bend in it, both keeping it away from Point Reyes and away from Cordell Bank, for both the fishing and safety reasons and some ecological reasons. In the west, the narrowing of the lanes and extending it out past the Farallon Islands and out past the shelf break. And then in the south, just extended it further south to increase that predictability. So the end result was that was adopted by IMO, and a coincidental benefit of this was that what this chart is the likelihood, it's kind of data combined with a model of where we expect to see whales. And so a reduction in the coincidence of deep draft ships and whales, and whale breeding grounds and where they like to be, which, as was stated earlier, no one wants to come into port with a whale on their bow. So, all right, so just real quick, so we've been also using AIS as the text messaging to enhance navigation safety. This is another capability that we got after the America's Cup. During America's Cup, we would have a message that was triggered when a vessel would pass the Golden Gate that came across either on their MKD, or if it was set up on their ECDIS to display there, saying that the America's Cup regulation is in effect, to use caution. And we've also done it during the 10-knot speed recommendations in the approaches to San Francisco Bay as a reminder to ships that that's in place. So that's that. And then geographic notices, the future state. Commander Tama talked about the couple of collisions or elisions that we had with the Bay Bridge. One thing that this isn't really a finished product yet of how the geographic notices are going to look. One thing we think is that, we could maybe, instead of broadcasting minimum wake zones, it comes up on your ECDIS display, and maybe instead of us just having our CMAs, which lock down navigation during heavy fog, we broadcast these fairways that say there's low visibility around the Bay Bridge, and you use designated fairways for transit, and you stay within those fairways. Maybe that's what it'll look like in the future. Really quick, my last thing is using AIS data to measure, to leverage Met Hydro and NOAA ports visibility data. Right now we have these 3 visibility sensors around the bay. You have to go and get the information for the most part, and that helps us to get a better picture. We talked about the microclimates and patchy fog around the bay. Throughout the bay we have many NOAA port stations, and that's what the data looks like if you go to the website. In the future, what we hope to be able to see is those are the IMO symbols, right, for the weather station. Perhaps you click on that and what pops up is graphs like that, or perhaps you click on it and what pops up is air temperature data like that. We also are in the process of getting an air gap sensor put up on the Bay Bridge, and that is what the air gap sensor will look like eventually on AIS. Sorry.
Okay, to wrap it up, we're just about done. Thank you guys. I know we're throwing a ton of information at you. We need feedback, and this is what we tell our local users. Is this technology useful? And that's what prototyping is all about. Put it out there, let the mariners use it and see what happens. Explore ways to increase demand. If you build it, they will come. We know that not a lot of ships have this capability. You have to target the early adopters. I don't worry about the bottom of the pyramid yet. We'll get to the bottom of the pyramid. Let's target the early adopters. When you have an engaged group like the pilots and the ferry operators that have the technology and want to try it out, let's go after them and see what we can do. And continue to explore additional applications. The stakeholder engagement is critical, as the captain said in New Orleans. The Coast Guard has this technology now. You can, in the United States, if you want to do this in your port, you can go talk to your Coast Guard, talk to the HSC, and we can explore this. What are the lessons learned? Stakeholder partnerships critical. Limited population have this, and the Coast Guard's no exception. There are some infrastructure challenges. AIS A-Town has a lot of potential, both as an enhancement and to put aids in where you couldn't possibly do it before, like in the offshore TSS because of water depth. And we talked about the messaging and waterways management, and yes, some capital investment is required. Thank you all very much. Happy to take any questions.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. That's a fantastic example of not just a test case, but an actual application, and I hope that in time some of the lessons learned get into the IALA testbed database so that other people can learn from that and also improve the harmonization of this kind of application around the world. Really fantastic application. Okay, we're into coffee now. I will ask you to return precisely at 1500. Anything else, Sam? Okay, thank you very much.